So, Chair, this is Sarah Steed, Committee Manager. You should now be live. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. So good morning, everybody. My name is Nigel Blaseby. I am the Delivery Manager for Development Management for the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service, and I am the Chair of this meeting. I would like to welcome you all to Cambridge City Council's Development Control Forum meeting taking place today, Wednesday, 13th of October. So I will roll call councillors alphabetically by surname to ensure they are present. We have received apologies from Councillor Herbert. So please advise if you know of any further apologies from any other councillors when I ask you to speak. So are you present, Councillor Bagent?
I certainly am.
Thank you. Councillor Dryden?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Flaubert?
I just messaged her, Chair, because she sometimes has internet issues, so I'll let you know if I hear.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Goulsthorpe-Wood? I thought I saw.
Sorry, I was still muted. Yes, I'm
okay.
here.
I thought I saw you here. You were here. Councillor Pora?
Present.
Councillor Smart?
Present.
And Councillor Thornborough?
Present.
Thank you.
Right,
So have I missed anybody else out? Have I missed anyone out?
Councillor Robertson is here as well, not a committee member, but a ward member. And I think I have apologies from my colleague, Mike Davey.
Okay, thank you. So will you be speaking as ward member today?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, thank you. Right, so the officers permanently at the table, so to speak, for this meeting are the Principal Planner, Steve Fraser-Lim. Do you just want to say hello, Steve?
Hello, hi, yeah, Steve Fraser-Lim here, the case officer for the application at Devonshire Gardens.
Thank you. We have the committee manager, Claire Tunnicliffe, and morning, and the meeting producer, Sarah Steed.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So we're also joined by representatives of the applicant. So please, can you confirm that you are present, Mike Derbyshire?
Yes, Nigel, I'm here. I'm present.
Thank you. And Matt Yeoman?
Yes, Chair, I'm here.
Thank you. And Doug Higgins?
Yes, Nigel. Hi, I'm here.
Thank you. We're also joined by representatives of the petitioners. So please, can you confirm that you are present, Edward Lee?
Present.
Do we have anybody that I have missed? No.
Frank Goulsthorpe, our secretary, is also on there.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Good morning, Frank.
Yeah, present.
Thanks. So if anyone has any problems hearing me throughout the meeting, please alert me by waving your hands or typing in the meeting chat function. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Can I ask all participants to keep themselves muted unless they have been invited to speak by myself, and to keep your backgrounds blurred, please. If members would like to ask a question or get the attention of the chair, they will need to type speak or put a single letter S in the chat function, and I will introduce you when you're able to speak. And the chat function will be regularly checked by myself and the committee manager. Please note that people who have followed the published meeting link will only be able to watch the meeting and will not be able to participate. Please also note that there is about a 20-second delay between the actual meeting and the meeting which the public can view live streamed. So this meeting is automatically recorded and will be available for public viewing for 6 months from the date of the meeting. So just a little bit about the forum. So the aims of the forum are to allow early discussion of the planning issues and to explore the scope for agreement and compromise between all sides. So the format of the forum is as follows. So we've gone through the introduction and councillor interests. We'll have a presentation of the application by the applicant agent, principally to address the issues that have been raised by the petitioners, and that will be up to 15 minutes. Then we'll have a presentation of the views of the petitioners against the application, and that will be up to 15 minutes also. Then we'll have a presentation by the planning officer, which will essentially be an update on where we are with the application, and that is up to 10 minutes. Then we'll have comments by ward councillor up to 15 minutes. Then we'll have a 30-minute session for members, questions and issues arising. Then we'll have the summing up, 5 minutes sum up by the applicant agent, followed by summing up by the petitioners, again up to 5 minutes. Okay, so please could councillors confirm if they have any declarations of interest? So I can see Councillor Bayesian, you've said that you're a member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign, so that's noted, thank you. Okay, so could the applicant agent deliver their presentation, please? You have 15 minutes and the committee manager will advise you when your speaking time is up. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just share the presentation while hopefully everyone will be able to see it. It should just be coming up full screen very shortly.
I think at the moment you're showing your desktop. That's it. Yeah.
Can you see that, Chair? Everyone can see that?
Yes.
It's on the screen, Matt.
Great. Okay. Okay. I think Douglas, you're going to speak first, and then myself. Sorry, then Mike, and then myself. Yes, so good morning everyone. My name's Douglas Higgins from First Base. We're mixed use developers that focus on creating vibrant communities through having that sort of genuine balanced mix of homes and places of work and leisure, retail and public realm. I should mention here we're working with Railpen, who are very much the long-term owner and investor of the site, the Travers Perkins site. So that a lot of people will be very familiar with them. They're major investors already in Cambridge, and they're very much looking at you know, the long-term hold here. So creating that sort of legacy and that lasting community. We've run through 3 rounds of consultation here over the last sort of year, 18 months. We've done the 2 statutory rounds of public consultation plus community needs assessment. We've had over 3,000 people respond through the digital platform that we use, Give My View, which we use on a number of our projects, and it was always very well received, and the feedback we got has been largely very positive. And I should say that thank you to Edward and his colleagues at SOPRA for the constructive dialogue and meetings we've had with them to date, and we look forward to continuing that discussion today. I'm joined here by Mike Derbyshire of Bidwells and Matt Yeoman of Buckley Gray Yeoman, who I will hand over to now.
I think you've missed one slide out, Matt, which is probably a wise thing. Glossing over me is always advisable. I just want to pick up on the challenges that we now have in Cambridge, and what I want to do is take out a couple of quotes from the Transport and Scrutiny Committee, which dealt with the local plan on the 28th of September. What members are saying, the vision for the new plan proposed to be is we want Greater Cambridge to be a place where a big decrease in our climate comes with a big increase in the quality of everyday life for all of our communities. New development must reduce carbon emissions and reliance on the private car, create thriving neighbourhoods with a variety of jobs and homes we need, increase nature, wildlife and green spaces, and safeguard our unique heritage. What I also want to emphasise is the plan takes inspiration from what is unique about our area, embraces this bold new approach. And I think to deliver on your vision of carbon zero and climate change, we do need to be bold, and this scheme looks to do that entirely. And what I've got up on the screen are 3 of the key elements that came out of the discussion that you had on the 28th. Reducing climate impact through compact development located to connect homes and jobs, and where active and sustainable travel can be maximised. I don't think you can have a better location than what we have at Devonshire Gardens. Making best use of suitable safeguarded and brownfield land. And making best use is a term that we'll probably discuss throughout this presentation. Making the best use of existing and committed key infrastructure, sustainable transport infrastructure. So the challenge we have is to meet your objectives within the local plan with a scheme that delivers a high standard of living. We absolutely think we've done that, but I think I'm handing over to Matt now to take you through the 4 questions that were raised by Edward and Sopra in terms of their concerns over the scheme. So Matt, if I can pass over to you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Hopefully you can see that. Yes, I'm going to address the 4 questions raised by the petitioners. First of which was the provision of usable open green space and the comment that perhaps it was too small and cramped. Just going back sort of over the last 2 years of looking at a blank sheet of paper and starting from scratch, what we wanted to do when we began that process of looking at the blank sheet of paper was to ensure that there was a large publicly accessible garden for all at the heart of the development. And this slide hopefully shows you the scale of that space. It's 100 metres long. You can see the people in the buggies, hopefully giving you a bit of space, a bit of scale. We wanted to ensure that that garden for all wasn't just a green space, but was providing some real sense of community and use to the people that live and work there and the wider community. So there's a creche, there's the rainwater is dealt with through rain gardens, there's community spaces, there's cafes, and there's edible planting and play space. That's a sort of plan of the same space, just again highlighting the natural play spaces, the creche garden, the planting and the fruit, etc. So that was at the heart of the concept and has remained there all the way through the design process. But as well as ensuring the public garden open space for all of a large size, we wanted to ensure that the people that lived there and worked there also had their own private spaces, and all of the residential units have either gardens, winter gardens or private balcony spaces, and the workspace has communal roof terraces and gardens, and you can see just one to the south there is about 2,000 square meters, so they are meaningful size and really usable. So we wanted to make sure that outside space was at the heart of it. The feedback from all of that has been very positive, as Doug alludes to. There's very strong support for the green space. Over 3,000 people consulted and 87% feeling very positive or neutral about that design. We wanted to compare that. We wanted to exceed what had been done before and what precedents had been set, and we also wanted to test ourselves and make sure that those spaces were big enough. And if you just compare Devonshire Gardens to just a couple very locally, CB1 is 16% open space on the site, Ironworks is 28%, we are at 51% of our site is open space. And there's some just comparisons there, which because of time I won't necessarily take you through. But having made that central space large, ensuring that it's twice the size of what has happened locally, we wanted to make sure that that space got adequate sunlight, and these sun path diagrams show that the modelling demonstrates that the space gets high levels of sunlight for significant proportions of the day. And that's reflected in the case officer's feedback, which concludes by saying that it will contribute towards ensuring the development is an attractive place to live, work and visit. The second question raised by the petitioners is one of visitor car parking, deliveries and car clubs. We think we're the first in saying this is the first major scheme in Cambridge to be car free, and so our starting point was just to limit car parking spaces to those who would require them for wheelchair access or for accessible units, and that culminated in 3 car parking spaces, the visitor accessible car parking space to allow people who need private transport to visit the site, a car club parking and a residential parking space. In terms of deliveries, we wanted to ensure that the delivery spaces were at the extremities of the site, so there's one to the north and one to the south, deliberately so that the deliveries don't impact on the heart of the green space and the heart of the development. However, listening to the consultation feedback, we've increased the car parking from 3 to 5, so there are now 2 accessible car parking spaces, 2 club car parking spaces and 2 visitor spaces. We could increase it more, but we're all in that dilemma then, whether it's more car parking, less trees, more hard landscaping, and we feel we've struck the balance right in this number of car parking spaces for those that need them. Deliveries, Our preference was for the deliveries to be in a loading bay to the north of the site, or sort of just off the road. Feedback from your highway authority was that they felt that that was not what they wanted to see, and they'd rather see deliveries within our site. And so the little image on the right is now our response to that, and deliveries are now taking place within our site, as opposed to our original preference, which was for a loading bay on the road, which is the image on the left. In terms of cycle storage, the cycle storage is, as one would hope it would be, fully compliant, policy compliant. It actually is in excess of policy requirements, because we're providing more single stacked spaces than we're required to. We feel that's much better than the double stacked spaces. There are double stacked spaces, of course, but we wanted to push as much as we could the single stacked spaces, and those are distributed around the site. They're local to where the residents live, they're secure, and for the workers there's a central hub for cycles and repairs, and a route that safely links across the site. The third question that was raised by the petitioners was the density and compactness of the dwellings not being conducive to a high quality of life. And I think this is just conscious of time, so forgive me for going reasonably quickly. But our starting point in responding to this, and it was our starting point when we looked at the blank sheet of paper, was to ensure that all of the homes that we're providing meet the minimum standards and exceed where they can the minimum space standards, to ensure that those homes are of adequate size right at the beginning. Your local plan has requirements, government has requirements, and all of the homes meet those space standards. So in the homes themselves meet the space standards. But we wanted to go further. We wanted to ensure that those homes had adequate private outdoor space, not only gardens, but balconies or winter gardens. There isn't a Cambridge requirement for this at the moment. I think it's maybe part of the emerging SDP, but there are standards out there from other local, and the London Housing Design Guide stipulates 5 square metres, and we've made sure that all our homes meet those standards. So the homes themselves are of the right size, plus we're providing some outside space. And this is all trying to fix the puzzle of providing adequate homes for the country on brownfield sites where we're protecting the green belt, which is not always an easy task, as we're all aware. But that leads then to this discussion about density and the quality of life. And density and the quality of life, we believe, is not mutually exclusive. You can have both, and it works because you need to surround those houses of adequate size and space with spaces that are enjoyable. We've talked about the green space. You need to provide them with a community within that area, which is a local community. We're working with a lot of the retailers and operators on Mill Road to provide the cycle hub, to provide the communal kitchen and the deli, to provide creative workspaces, a library of things, a bakery, a creche. So the sense of community within the density is exciting and vibrant and is local. It's not chains that are coming in. And then that needs to be managed. And the great thing about build to rent is that it's managed long term. And we've looked at densities compared to other areas in Cambridge. We're at 81 residential units per hectare. If we compare it to other developments in Cambridge, which have been highly successful, people enjoy living there, these developments are 2-3 times the density of Devonshire Gardens. You look wider afield, Canada, the Netherlands, again, very successful developments, 2-3 times the density of Devonshire Gardens. And it's been done before. Belgravia, Maida Vale, wonderful places to live, wonderful communities, very vibrant, very enjoyable, and 2-3 times the density of Devonshire Gardens. So it's not mutually exclusive. Finally, just summing up in the few minutes that I have left, the question about single aspect units, and do the units receive enough daylight during the period of the year. Dual aspect, I don't want to dwell on definitions. I know you have an emerging SDP which ties in with probably the most accepted definition of dual aspect, which is the London Plan. We comply with that definition. 81% of our residential units have opening windows on 2 external walls. There is one area where that is difficult to make work, and that is the north of the site. There is a north-south grain to the design. So most of the residential units have east-west facing, but the north end of the site has to deal and respond to its setting of the railway cottages and the mews setting. And as a result, there are a small number of north-facing units addressing that context. In my experience of working in many urban sites in London, around the country and in Europe, we have an exceptionally high level of dual aspect and a very, very low level of north-facing flats. But we wanted to make sure that those units have adequate daylight. Daylight is really, really important. Sunlight is lovely to have, but it's not always desirable because of the glare and the solar gain that it brings with it. 96% of the rooms in this development comply with the daylight requirements set out in the study that has been undertaken. So really, really bright light flats. But on the other side of the coin, is it too bright? Is it too light? Are they going to overheat? All of the units comply with current planning policy in terms of overheating. None of them overheat. But we wanted to go further. One is very aware of climate change and the emergency that is bringing. So we've tested the development, we've tested the design with the climate scenarios of 2050. And again, all of the units can meet the increasing temperatures with some adaptations which can be bolted on. So we future-proofed the design going forward as well. And just to finish quickly before I hand up to Mike to summarise, we were asked the question, could you deal with those north flats in a deck access situation rather than, could they therefore become dual aspect? We looked at this quite heavily. We looked at the management of deck access because of a build to rent scheme that this is. And the response to the report by Savills, who are experts in this field, is that the deck access is not optimal for build to rent because of the lack of privacy, the decks becoming cluttered, the difficulty of management, and that results in a less safe development. So hopefully that's addressed the questions raised by the petitioners, and Mike, maybe just a minute to summarise.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Doug. I think I just wanted to come back to the slide that I started with, which is we have to do things slightly differently now with developments in the town centre to deliver on the objectives that you have in your local plan in terms of mixed use, car free. In terms of city centres, there is a balance between height, freeing up the ground floor plane, but that is typical of cities, that to provide the ground floor activation, the green spaces, with it comes a little bit of height. What we've hopefully demonstrated to you in the last 15 minutes is that we are fully aligned to the objectives that you have as a council in terms of sustainability, car-free development, mixed use, and the benefits that go with that. We do have objectives on the call, and I'm very mindful and respectful of that. But somewhat remarkably for a scheme of this nature, there is only 4 objections from the public on the file. We have 4 letters of support and 4 objection letters, and you know, as a committee, that is a remarkably low number, and I think testament to First Base's engagement and reaching out early in the process. You saw the 3,000 responses that we've got. Hopefully, Nigel, we kept to our 15 minutes or pretty close.
Just a minute or two over, so I'll allow the petitioners the same time. So thank you for that. So please, could the petitioners now deliver their presentation? You have 15 minutes, and I'll allow a couple of minutes over because the agents have the same time. So thank you.
Right, I've shared my screen. Can you see that?
Yes, we can, thanks.
Okay, so picking up on the 4 main points of concern, starting with the first one, setting the context of the local plan. This site was actually expected to have 43 dwellings on it. That was what the local plan allocation is. Now, what's actually being proposed are 100 dwellings, and what the applicant hasn't so far mentioned in this presentation is enough office space for up to 1,000 employees, certainly 800 and possibly up to 1,000, and also a creche, a private creche in the bottom and the southern corner of the site, and a number of community rooms. So the level of development of this site goes far beyond what the local plan envisaged. Now, we fully accept that high density development in this location is appropriate. The question is the level of the intensity of that development. We believe that particularly with the high volume of office space, it is overdeveloping this site to a significant degree that will harm the quality of life for the people who are living on the site, possibly for the people who are working on the site, but it also creates a lot of competition for use of the green space that's being offered in this site. It should also be pointed out that by creating space for up to 1,000 employees, which is almost would count as a windfall employment site, because this is not envisaged in the local plan. This is actually going to exacerbate the existing problem we have in the balance between employment and residential provision. In other words, it will create a net increase in demand for housing of over 500 dwellings. And we're already struggling to keep up with the demand for housing. It is a shortage of housing that the region faces, not jobs. We have no problem in creating jobs and actually providing office space for those jobs. Also in the local plan is the a requirement of 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people for informal open space, and also 0.3 hectares per 1,000 for children and teenagers. So that's 2.5 hectares per 1,000 people. Now this site with 100 dwellings, you'd expect about 250 people to be living there. So that would require a 6.625 hectares or 62,500 square meters of informal open space and children's play area. What is actually being provided is somewhere in the region of 0.24 hectares, or 24,000 square meters. That, as you can see, is it's just over a third of the local plan requirement. Now, the applicant will argue that this is a central city location. There is a strong case for reducing the green space allocation in order to fit more housing, because it's a sustainable location where most people can walk and cycle, and indeed this is a car-free development. That is all true, but we have to see it in the context of what other green space do people have access to. Now, actually, this site is probably the furthest of any site in Petersfield from a large open green space. Coleridge Rec is the largest that's available. That is a considerable walk or cycle from this location. Millrose Cemetery, which is probably the closest, is already overused in a way. And the other green spaces are either not very well designed, such as Ravensworth Gardens, and not very inviting. So there is a desperate need for green space that works for the people who live there and for the people who live around. And we don't believe that the provision here, although it is beautifully designed, is sufficient in volume to cope with the demand from the residents and from this potential 1,000 workers and all the visitors who will be associated with the residents, the workers, and also the community rooms. This view, I think, gives you a sense of just how cramped the space actually is. You have tall buildings, vertical faces on both sides. On the left-hand side, you can see that actually behind the hedges is private space. That is not part of the public open space, although it is. It looks like it's part of the open space. It is not a space that, when you think, how do people want to use open space? In the summer, people might want to sunbathe. People are not going to want to sunbathe on a very small space that's so heavily overlooked. Here, there's clearly not enough space to play games for children to be playing ball games or anything like that. So it's quite hard to see how this space is going to provide the needs for play and recreation that the residents and potentially the workers will have. Moving on to the issue about the aspects and the access to sunlight. The flats that are facing onto Devonshire Road are facing north of west, so they will not receive direct sunlight for most of the year at all. The ground floor ones have been correctly assigned as single aspect, but the ones on the higher floors have been deemed to be dual aspect because they have a recessed balcony. Now, I don't believe that that should be correct. This is a correct interpretation of the London Guide, which makes very clear that a bay window does not count as more than one aspect. In a similar way, a recessed balcony should not count as creating an additional aspect. But why it's important is this access to direct sunlight. There's plenty of research about the mental health connection between access to sunlight and good mental health. And a lot of these, most of these units will not receive direct sunlight for a large part of the year. And that will affect the quality of life that we can expect people there to enjoy. I was surprised to see that the applicant was claiming that 96%, I think, of the rooms met the light standards. From my reading of the report, it said that 48% did. So that means that 52% of the living rooms do not meet the annual probable sunlight hours target values. I think that's not an acceptable level to have met. It also explicitly excludes the effect of trees. And since the trees are close to the buildings on the west and the north side, they will have effect. The trunks will provide a shading effect, the branches will, even in the winter. And because of the fact that the aspect of some of those is north of west and to the north, the presence of trees will also reduce the indirect light that gets into those flats. Something that the applicant hasn't touched on is the fact that the Chisholm Trail, which is provided for through the site alongside the railway line, currently has no agreed access to the north or to the south. Now, this isn't the applicant's fault. They don't have control over the land outside of their boundary. But nevertheless, this is potentially creates a serious problem, because if that land is not used for the Chisholm Trail, it will be redundant. It will have no use and therefore could potentially attract antisocial behaviour. It is really, really important, both for the Chisholm Trail and for the health of this development, that those access points are agreed. If they can't be agreed with Network Rail in the timescale needed for this development, then alternative plan must be developed by the planning authority and the highway authority. And on the southern end, that probably means creating a direct access to Angus Close, in order to give people a less conflicted access to Devonshire Road, in order to then get onto the railway station or into the city centre if that's where they're heading. Because this is a car-free development and the local plan does not actually have any standards specifically for car-free developments, actually the standards that are set there are not really relevant. So in particular, the level of deliveries to be expected on this site will be much higher than elsewhere, because people will not, people will be ordering their shopping online and they will be having it delivered because they can't drive to the supermarket with their own car. So that has to be taken into account, and I don't think this development has gone far enough in providing space for delivery vehicles, visitors who will be coming. Some of them will be coming by car. And also for deliveries to the offices as well, not just to the residents. As far as cycle parking goes, the residents will not have cars, and therefore the local plan requirement of one cycle space per bedroom doesn't make sense, because every single person living on that site, almost all of them, is going to have a cycle. So that means that 250 people, not 114 people, are going to need to be able to park a cycle on site. A significant proportion of those are going to be what are called off-gauge cycles, or cargo bikes or bikes with trailers, because any of them who have young families, that is how they're going to carry their young families around. So therefore we need a higher provision for that, in addition to one cycle space per person who is living on the site. We're pleased to see that there's been an increase in the number of car parking spaces, but I still don't think this is enough. Not enough for visitors, for deliveries, And that we need to factor in things like furniture removals vehicles as well, which will potentially be parked up for half a day at a time and therefore blocking other deliveries to the site. So that really needs to be thought through, because we do not want vehicles being parked up on Devonshire Road because there's no space to park on this site. Devonshire Road is already constricted and conflicted enough. And actually, I think we should be a bit visionary about this, and that this is the site where we should have electric car club vehicles parked for not just the residents on that site, but for the surrounding area. This is an ideal place to put in EV charging points for car clubs. So I think we need to think a bit bigger for that, because the future is that we don't, not just on this site, but actually elsewhere in the ward, that most people do not own their own car, they are using a club car. So sites like this need to be helping us move towards that future. Okay, those are my main points. Just a couple of points just from the presentation before. The provision for green space doesn't allow for the fact that 22% of the 22% of the plot is actually employment space. So that needs to be factored in when we're thinking about the dwellings per hectare. So there's 12,300 square meters of space in total. 2,750 of that is office space, and 2,400 is open green space. So I think we really need to get that balance right. Okay, Frank, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
Yes, thank you, Edward. Well, I would just like to say that I think I have to congratulate the developers on the amount of money they've poured into the public relations side of this development. I've rarely seen anything like it, to be quite honest. I mean, the applicants say they've had 3,000 responses, positive mostly, to their proposals. But I have to tell the committee that the way that the proposals were presented to people was, in my view, not exactly accurate. To be blunt, the open space has been presented almost as this bucolic haven in the centre of our urban environment. And in fact, the reality is far from that. I mean, I suppose I shouldn't say this. I mean, pictures of strawberries and edible plants being included in this development. I mean, it's just been. I mean, the plain fact of the matter is that we have here a development crammed into this site where the level of open space provided for people is absolutely minute. I mean, there have been comparisons made with Mill Park, which is on CB1. And it's said that this has got more space than Mill Park. Well, I happen to know what's happened on Mill Park, and I know Councillor Robertson has as well. There have been enormous problems on Mill Park with the open space in terms of antisocial behaviour, noise, disturbance, and the fact that there is absolutely no really usable play space for families with small children. I mean, when we met with the developers before, and I raised this issue of a play space for children, the answer was that we don't anticipate that the residents of this development will have children. Well, I suggested perhaps they'd like to ban sex as well, but they didn't even smile at that one. I mean, the truth of the matter is that there will be children on this site, and there is absolutely nowhere for them to play. I mean, the illustration shows a few planks. It's hardly adequate. That's not a play space. Really very poor. I have to say this, I'm disappointed. And when I've shown, I mean, this 3,000 responses, yeah, and Mike Derbyshire also says there's been very little reaction from local residents. Well, for those of you who know Devonshire Road, you'll also know that it is substantially houses a multiple occupation. Christ College own a lot of properties in Devonshire Road, a lot of private landlords do. As a residents association, we do struggle to get people engaged. But when we put a leaflet round about
Frank, we've lost your sound. Frank, we've lost your sound.
Sorry. How long ago?
Could I say, if you could just sum up?
Yes, I will sum up.
So.
I think there's been a deal of creation of over expectation, and the reality is that it's not what it's been purported to be. It's very sad in a way. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Edward and Frank. Can we now have the planning officer to provide us with an update?
Thank you, Chair.
About 10 minutes, if that's all right.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, okay. So just in terms of the sort of application and the stage we're at, the application was submitted on 2nd of August this year. There were some pre-application discussions prior to that as well with the applicants. Once the application was submitted, we've notified 675 neighbours, site and press notices displayed, and the consultation period ran to the 9th of September this year. There's also the petition, which is the subject of this meeting. We've received 3 letters of support and 4 letters of objection. In terms of the objections, they've raised the issues around lack of parking, space between the buildings not being sufficient, concern around the proposed rental housing, which could damage the cohesiveness of the community, and the buildings are too large, quality of the accommodation, and querying the location of the disabled parking. In terms of the letters of support, they're highlighting that the proposals will deliver new open space, community facilities, and enhance biodiversity. Car-free development would benefit the surrounding community, and there would be less HGV movements, and also that the office space would be good quality and meets the needs of small enterprises in the city, particularly in the tech and creative sectors. As well as the neighbour consultations, we've consulted with other departments in the planning service. In terms of affordable housing, we've consulted the officers who deal with that, and they have highlighted that the Greater Cambridge Housing Strategy has adopted in July 2021 a new annex with regard to build to rent, which seeks 20% of units to be let at 20% discount from market rent. So the proposals are sort of broadly in line with that, but they've requested some further information around a sort of scenario setting table to consider potential for an increase in the number of discount market rent units, or whether the discount could be increased. We've received comments from conservation and design officers, and they highlight that they appreciate that the scheme is the proposal site's quite complicated to develop, but have raised significant concerns around the amount of development, the visual presence of the development alongside the railway, similar to the CB1 development, but whether that's justified by this location. Concern around the heights of blocks C and D, which are those sort of largest blocks adjacent to the railway line, and that they could comprise a incongruous form that would be leaning over the finer grain context of the surrounding area, and also potentially detract from the setting of the adjacent conservation area in some of those views. Landscape officers have also highlighted some concerns with the townscape visual impact assessment and the assessment in which views impacts will arise. And they've also provided some more sort of detailed comments about the design of the open space within the middle of the site. Tree officers have raised some concerns about the space they've highlighted that the trees along the frontage of Devonshire Road are TPO trees. They've raised concern about the proximity of buildings to those trees, and also that the space within the centre of the site would be able to accommodate would not be sufficient to accommodate larger species that would be able to grow sort of unmanaged. In terms of sustainability, the sustainability officer has said that there's much to admire about the proposals in terms of sustainability, and in terms of the fossil fuel free energy strategy, BREEAM home quality mark, and the social value which has been identified from the proposals. However, they did raise a concern about the number of proposed single aspect units, and that the overheating assessment didn't take sufficient account of future climate scenarios, and that ground floor units may not be able to have windows open all the time to achieve the required cooling. Pollution officers have raised some comments about the noise assessment, just sort of detailed comments about how that's calculated and potential impacts from the crash. Drainage officers have provided some comments as well in terms of just some requesting some further information on how the 1 in 30 and 1 in 100 year rainfall events are managed. We've also had a number of external comments from external consultees. The Highway Authority has raised concerns about the proposed loading bay on Devonshire Road, which I think was shown on one of the illustrations, and on highway safety grounds. Section 106 officer at the Cambridgeshire County Council has sort of highlighted that there's a relatively low child yield from the development due to the smaller size of the units, and therefore no need for financial contributions for education or libraries. Environment Agency have also commented, requested a number of conditions around ground contamination and flood surface water management. And the lead local flood authority at Cambridgeshire County has also highlighted that the infiltration as part of the drainage scheme is likely to be problematic due to raised groundwater levels. So, I mean, we've got the full range now of consultation comments, so we're still sort of taking all this information into account and discussing with the applicants currently on the sort of way forward with the proposals. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So we've got now 15 minutes set aside for ward councillors. I understand Councillor Robertson, you would like to speak. So can I invite you to speak, please? And if you could limit your time to 15 minutes, please. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully I won't need that much time. Firstly, I must say I endorse entirely the comments from the Residents Association. This site is clearly in a case of overdevelopment. The pictures you saw of the cramped green space in the middle of the area is really not appropriate. But I'm mainly concerned in that respect that bringing 1,000, the applicant told me there would be up to 1,000 employees working in the offices on the site. Bringing that number of people to the site just creates a need for housing, rather than this site was primarily supposed to be providing housing and homes. But in fact, by creating all this employment space, you're going to create more problems with pressure on housing. So it's entirely unfortunate that the applicants are going such a heavy development. Now, I want to add a couple of new aspects to this meeting. The applicants have made much of the fact that there'll be public space, and in fact they refer to it as public park in many of the documents I've seen. This will not be property will not be run by the council. It won't be adopted open space that the council looks after. The proposal is that it will be paid for by service charges on the residents and on the offices. That is the way the maintenance of this site will be paid for. And I think that has been hidden from the PR exercise that the applicants have put forward. I do think that it's essential that they should either review this process and go back to adoption by the local council. And for instance, the Mill Road Depot, the ironworks site, all of the open space there is going to be adopted by the council and maintained by the council. There will be no service charges on the residents. On this site, on the Devonshire Garden site, the opposite. None of it will be adopted by the by the local authority as green space for maintenance by the council. It'll all be down to the residents and offices to pay for it. I did raise this with the developers. and they said they would look into the balance of the service charges being levied more on the offices than the flats and the housing, but it's the same problem. I really think they should either consider going back to scratch and getting it adopted by the local council and paying them a commuted sum to look after it, or they should publish the likely service charge figures and guarantee them for at least 10 years into the future. Because I've seen the problem at CB1 in Mill Park, where the residents there, service charges have shot up through the roof and above, because they're having to pay for all the public open space in the area because there's none of it's adopted by the council. So that's an entirely new issue which you really must be taken further. Second major concern is the amount of affordable homes that is proposed for the site. It's not been mentioned today, I think, but I think it is 20% of the 100 homes would be affordable, and that is defined as with rents at 80% of market rents, as I understand it. However, the problem with these build-to-rent sites is that they often find that the market rents that they're comparing with are enhanced. They're not standard market rents, they're enhanced levels, which means that the so-called 20% reduction in rents is actually not achieved. They're just paying market rents effectively. Now, if that is correct, then I think there needs to be some further discussion about making sure that the rent levels for the homes on the site are at a genuinely affordable level, below the 80% of the enhanced market rents that they're likely to be calculated on. I think the only other points I wanted to raise are, I'm concerned about deliveries to the site. The offices, quite a large number of offices, will have regular deliveries day after day. Those delivery vans, there's no service road around the back of the site for the offices. They'll all have to come from the parking on the Devonshire Road, just off the Devonshire Road, in the places made available for them. I don't think that's appropriate. And finally, I'm a bit concerned about the decision to select the planting by running a competition. Sounds very nice that you get the local residents in the area to decide what sort of plants should be put on the site, but the result is that plants which may not be appropriate if they're in so much shadow from the buildings for much of the year, or in bright sunshine on the east side of the blocks up against the Chisholm Trail. It really needs a professional approach to plantings. You can't just select things that look nice at one location and expect them to work in another location. There's too much of that goes on around the developments of the city, with landscaping not surviving. So a lot of grave issues, and I hope that the plans will be amended to some extent, and certainly the whole concept of the open space being paid for by the service charges on the residents and offices, that certainly needs to be reviewed before it goes any further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. So we now move on to the member questions and issues arising section. So I will remind members, if they would like to speak, to indicate they wish to do so in the chat function, and I will introduce you when it's your turn to speak. So this is a 30-minute section, and the committee manager will advise when the time is up. So I open it up to councillors. So Councillor Smart, you would like to speak.
Yep. Hello, thanks for the presentation. So I've got a list, not too long. I'll just go through that if that's okay then, Nigel. So at the start, it was said that it was from Mike Derbyshire, I think said it was from the Planning and Scrutiny Committee. I think that's Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee you were talking about. Mike, you also said that the development would be carbon zero. I think you might have meant net zero, possibly. 3, what have I got? So yeah, concerns about sun, I think, but so the space standards. So talks about meeting minimum space standards. Now, I've spoken in committee before about that, and I feel that those space standards are not minimums. They're not targets. They're not something to be achieved. They're something to be surpassed. So that's just a point on what you said there. There was a question that maybe the officer can help with about 4% that don't meet daylight or 52% that don't meet daylight in terms of what the two presentations said. There was nothing about any fossil fuels used on the site, so that's not clear. I don't know if you're going to be planning to use, for example, gas boilers. And just on that, there is a concern there from the presentations about whether there's going to be a need to add air conditioning units to the site, for example, on these single aspect dwellings. And just on, I mean, just thinking about air conditioning units being added onto the walls of those units, those dwellings, which would be quite, you know, wouldn't look too good really at the very least. It could also, if you're going to have gas boilers, then we might end up having air source heat pumps added on the sides of buildings as well, which could be a similar look, but of course a better thing, but still not too good looking. Not clear about that. Did the applicant think at all about anything other than this kind of current fashion for a look of brick, which isn't very sustainable, of course? There are other methods of construction, doesn't have to be brick. Tenure was my next question, but that's been covered now. And the other point I had, which was actually my first point I forgot to mention, was, are there any issues here? And this is to do, I suppose this is to do with the case officer with regard to the work that's been done by the applicant, which, you know, I suppose in a sense is very good. We've heard about all this work that's been done to sort of market the scheme essentially, or promote the scheme, or inform the local residents of the scheme. Is there any issue there that in a sense, every writer has a story inside them, so the local residents might want to say something about a scheme which they might have said to the applicant, but now might not be saying to us, the council, because it's already come out. So we don't have that information necessarily, hence the suggestion that 4 objections might be quite a small number. Is there a reason for that? And that's my last point. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. I think what I'll do is I will ask the case officer, Steve, just to answer that last point of yours and the clarification around the 4%, 52% daylight requirement, and then we'll come on to Mike, and I'll ask Mike to address the other points that you've raised. So, Steve, could you answer those points, please? Thanks. Steve, are you there? Steve, you're muted if you are there.
Yeah, so in terms of the sort of consultation that's been undertaken by the applicants, I mean, we would, the NPPF encouraged and planning practice guides. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Or?
Yes, we can hear you now, thanks. Yeah. You're not speaking now. We can't hear you now, Steve. Steve, I think you might have some technical issues, so can I'll come back to you if that's all right. So Mike, do you want to address the other points and we'll come back to Steve?
I can address the 48. The 96% was daylight, the 48% was sunlight. The standards in terms of residential accommodation rely on the daylight figure. The sunlight figure, as I think Matt stressed in his, can be lovely to have in certain circumstances, but it's not the essential measure in the BRE guidance. So the essential measure in terms of the quality of the space is the daylighting figure, which is the 96% that we quoted, because that is typically the standard that BRE would expect new accommodation to achieve. Councillor Smart, I've got my glasses on, but they aren't actually bifocals. So I've actually got it written down as Planning and Transport Committee, so I can't even read my own writing, Councillor. So apologies for that. But I think we were talking about the same meeting on the 28th. Doug, do you want to deal with the bio-regional approach and the question about fossil fuels and aircon? Because I think it might be useful to the members on the call to understand that approach, the One Planet Living approach to the scheme.
Yes, very happy to. So to start off, we have no fossil fuels on site. We're looking at a all electric energy strategy here. And
is now joining.
Particularly on the residential, we are looking at a direct electric heating solution. So that's where we don't have air source heat pumps. There won't be a need for air conditioning. There will be mechanical ventilation, which you expect for modern builds in the form of MVHRs, mechanical ventilation and heat recovery. And then there's a bypass mode in order to give some sort of cooling benefit during the summer months. But the investment here is on the fabric, so that we have huge thermal efficiencies in the fabric of the buildings, so that the space heating requirement is absolutely minimal, and really the bulk of the energy demand comes from hot water. So as I said, it's very straightforward. It's very low in terms of embodied carbon. It's very low in terms of future servicing and maintenance, because it's very straightforward with the electric panel heaters and immersion heaters for hot water. You know, there's very little moving parts. There's no unsightly, noisy air source heat pumps, and it's incredibly efficient. So that's the strategy that we're adopting. And again, there's huge benefits there in terms of air quality by not having any gas boilers on site. Bioregional are.
Can I just interrupt you? Sorry, Sarah's put a note in the chat to say that someone has joined but not entered 141 before dialing in, so their mobile number may be visible. So just to alert whoever that is to the fact that your number may be visible, and this is a publicly streamed meeting. So no apologies. Please carry on.
So I was touching on Bioregional, and who are our sustainability consultants here, and we're using their One Planet Living framework, which goes much beyond just looking at the materials and energy here. That does look at culture, it looks at happiness, health, food, water. So they've really challenged us and the design team to look at how to reduce water demand as well. That's why we've got a lot of edible planting on site for sustainable food production, and there are lots of other measures such as rainwater harvesting, grey water recycling that we haven't measured, but is sort of covered in other documents and of course in our planning application. So by adopting an all-electric approach, we are enabling it to be net zero carbon in operation, which is hugely important and aligns obviously with the council's aspirations on that.
Okay, thank you. Steve, are you able to answer that consultation point now? I don't know if we've solved the technical issues.
Yeah, sorry, it was a Wi-Fi issue. Can everyone hear okay now?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, so in terms of the public consultation, the planning practice guidance does encourage developers to undertake consultation with the public at the pre-application stage or also at application stage. So that then by undertaking that, the applicants are doing what they're supposed to do. We will also do our consultation as part of the application stage, and members of the public can have the opportunity to comment direct to the council for us to consider, but they may also engage with the applicants as well. But that whole process is kind of as is sort of encouraged to happen, really.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Councillor Smart, have you had answers to your questions? You're happy with those?
A couple of points outstanding we haven't addressed, Martin. So Councillor Smart, so I'm conscious of the open space, the tenure, and our choice of brick. So Matt, you're the architect. In terms of the choice of materials and sustainable materials, you're doing a huge number of buildings in London. we are looking at BREEAM outstanding for the Commercial Buildings Councillor. Do you want to discuss the approach in terms of the materials and our thoughts on sustainability on that in answer to that particular question?
Yeah, in terms of brick, one has to choose materials which have a sustainable in their production, but also sustainable in their longevity. And we're aware that there have been a number of designs over the years. We've all probably seen them and been aware of where new materials have been used and they don't last very long, and then you have to replace them all, or they deteriorate, or they don't look great. So I think in natural materials, in brick, in stone, we're all aware that they have a very, very long lifespan. So inherently they are massively sustainable. We know there are embodied carbon concerns with brick. We're doing a development in London at the moment which is using a recycled brick rather than the traditional way in which bricks are manufactured. So there is an evolving brick technology that is addressing the embodied carbon in producing the product. But I think for us, it's about the context, it's about the longevity that are driving that, and we're quite a way down that. We're quite a distance from actually specifying the very specific brick that we want to use. That will be undoubtedly a condition, and one would hope that we'll look very much in depth at which brick is selected based on not only its look from a contextual point of view, but also from its embodied carbon production. I hope that's answered the question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smart, are you content with the answers to the question?
Yeah, I don't want to take up all the time, Nigel, but I mean, okay, let's come back briefly then. So on the 4% don't get the right daylight, is that okay? Are we, is the applicant happy with that? Because that's 4% of the dwellings that aren't what they need to get. And secondly, of two, the information that's been collected by the applicant in terms of their marketing, all of that, do we have access to that, the full set of that information, so we have all that data in terms of what people actually said?
The BRE guideline is a guideline, councillor. In an urban area where you have to respect the urban grain, where you are required to create streets and places, 96% is an extraordinarily high number to achieve that. We can confirm that with the experience of boardrooms who are our specialist advisors on that. Matt can confirm that, and I can confirm that. To get that level of sunlight and daylight on a scheme embedded within an existing town centre surrounded is a very, very high figure indeed. So we're not a greenfield site with no constraints. We are an urban site with constraints, and to get to 96% councillor is a significant achievement. In terms of the consultations, I don't know how we've got the website live, Doug. I don't know if you want to answer that question.
I think as part of the application, there's the statement of community involvement. So I think that sets out in more detail a lot of the responses and feedback that we received as part of the consultation process.
I think we have to move on, I'm afraid. So that's perhaps something we can take away from this meeting and discuss further. Councillor Gorthrope-Wood, you wanted to speak next, please.
Oh, good morning. So Martin's asked quite a few questions I'd have put, but I'd like a little bit. I'm pleased to see that you are not using fossil-based fuels for heating systems. Given that the council owns building has been including quite a lot of passive house levels and standards, what I'd like is a bit more information about the heating system and the electric system. I noted that you didn't show solar panels on the roofs, although you did have some green roofs and of course the shared open space roofs. What I'm also concerned about, a lot of new flats don't seem to have individual meters for electricity and water. I'd like a bit more information on recycling and use of grey water, especially as this is quite a very substantial development. Is there some way that water can be recycled for use by the residents within the flats. And I have a lot of concerns about affordable rent. And given that we're going, the new local plan will likely have 40% rather than 20% as affordable housing. What I want to be clear is about what those affordable rents would be. You know, not that they're what we're seeking is that they are lower than market rents and substantially lower, so they are proper affordable rents, closer to social rents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if we could have brief answers to those, please.
Sorry, one more thing. How many EV chargers, please?
Doug, did you want to deal with the energy points to start with?
Yes, very, very happy to. So in terms of the heating system for the residential, because we're investing so much in the fabric and the thermal efficiency of the fabric of these buildings, we can deliver electric panel radiators in terms of the space heating, because that energy requirement will be absolutely minimal. The electric panel radiators are can be very attractive. They come in a number of designs. They're very easy to service and maintain going forward. And they should be very efficient here. In terms of grey water recycling, we are exploring and committed to short retention systems, which is technology such as using some of the drain water from washhand basins to top up the toilet systems. This actually has a huge impact on reducing water demand across the site. We've also got rainwater harvesting. We've got 2 blue roofs across the site, which takes rainwater, stores rainwater, which can be used for sustainable irrigation of the green spaces and the edible planting, again, helping to reduce water demand. We are, again, committed to PV panels. We have extensive number of photovoltaics on the roof of blocks C and D. They're south-facing. There's a large array there. They're all in the south-facing pitches. They're integrated within the roof, so maybe with some of the aerial CGIs, they don't look as visible as they would be, because they're not retrofitted. They're actually integrated, but we are 100% committed to those to generate on-site renewable energy. In terms of meters, every individual apartment will be metered with smart meters, both in terms of water and energy, so that people again are sort of incentivized to reduce their own energy demand for their particular unit. In terms of EV charging, I'm very passionate about this. I've been driving an EV for the best part of 18 months now. All the spaces that we mentioned earlier in terms of car sharing and visitors, the car clubs and the visitor bays will have EV charge points. So we're committed to that. We're in talks with the likes of Enterprise and Zipcar to manage and take on those car club bays, and that will be dedicated. They will be dedicated for electric vehicles with associated charge points. And perhaps I'll pass on to Mike on the affordable point.
So you mentioned the 20% and the 40%. 40% in the emerging local plan is a little bit more nuanced than that. It looks at larger sites for 40%. But you have no policy in relation to build to rent in the current local plan. So the interim guidance that was adopted in July is the guidance. It's 2 months old and it is the 2020. So that is currently the council's policy. But you're quite right in terms of the level of discount. The way that it's currently working, as we get to the process of letting those flats, when we get closer to that point, then there is a more detailed discussion with your housing colleagues about what that level of discount is. It isn't the discussion now, it's more at the time that the flats are let. So we've got an idea what market rents are now and what that 20% discount is. The discussion is ongoing with your housing colleagues, councillor, as to what is an appropriate, that 20% discount. But that is the discussion when we get closer to the letting, which is a couple of years away after construction. So we're fully aware of that. We were fully aware from day one of the need for this, and also the overwhelming need for employment space for in the central area as well. But hopefully that answers your questions.
Thank you very much. Time is pressing. We've got 3 other members who wish to speak. So, Councillor Gorsalrable, can I just confirm that you've had adequate answers to your questions, please?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So shall we move on then? So the next councillor is Councillor Poor, if you'd like to speak, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, just had a few questions. I think it would be good to see an access point to a future Chisholm Trail. I appreciate you can't necessarily guarantee it, but it would be a shame to block that off. Secondly, the trees on Devonshire Road that are existing, from your plans, it appears that most of them will be retained, but I'd be grateful for a comment from potentially the officer about how those will be protected if we are proposing to put enormous buildings next to it in the root protection areas. Like other colleagues, I do have some concern about this idea. I think Mike mentioned a bolted on adaptations later. I would much prefer us to look at passive house type adaptations now, though I do obviously welcome the fact that there'll be no gas on site, and grey water is important as well. I do want to pick up on the issues around family space. I mean, there is going to be a creche on this site, which obviously means that there will be young people and children there. And one of the things that I didn't think that I could see was any kind of play area, because it did seem to be extensively paved or planted. And that area particularly doesn't really have access to anywhere nearby. And I know the best thing everyone wants to do when you pick up your kids is you want to take them to the park. So I would be interested in the developers' views on why there isn't green space, so lawn space or parks there, particularly as you will have families living in flats, however small they are, because unfortunately of the cost of living in Cambridge. Picking up on the affordable homes, I can see Councillor Robertson has also picked up the point I was going to make, that it's an aspiration, I understand, to be 40% and a minimum of 20%. But I do notice our current local policy 45 on affordable housing does confirm that service charges must be included in the discount. But that does give me some concern in terms of service charges. There's been a lot in the press recently about these rocketing up. I also have concerns about areas being left not managed properly. I have people who live nearby have similar issues. I think that it would be useful for the developers to explore handing that back to the city council with some kind of commuted sum, because otherwise we could end up with basically dying plants in a few years and excessive service charges, which are concerning. I think that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Steve, could I just ask you to answer that question about the trees and how they'd be protected first, and then we'll move to Mike. Thanks.
Well, I mean, yeah, the tree officer has sort of highlighted, has raised comments on impact on the trees. I mean, the normal sort of way you protect trees during construction is you'd have you'd kind of protected root protection areas, and you sort of mark them out with fencing and prevent vehicles and storage of materials and things in that location close to the trees. And we can require details of tree protection to be submitted via planning conditions. You know, sometimes there might be more sort of specialist kind of protection required, or for instance, you know, more, you know, air spade kind of excavations to work out the extent of the trees and things like that. I mean, you know, if tree officers think that's necessary, then we can include planning conditions for that.
Thanks, Steve. So, Mike, can I ask you to address the other points, please?
I'm going to ask Matt to bring up a plan that will deal with 2 questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, can I ask you to be brief as well, because we are running a little.
It would be very brief. Councillor, the smaller buildings are adjacent to, if you could choose to say the site plan, Matt.
Yeah, okay.
The smaller buildings are adjacent to the Devonshire Garden trees, so it is the terraced house, not the commercial buildings that's adjacent to the tree. You will see there is a significant distance between the front of those buildings and the trees. And secondly, the site already, as you're probably aware, is completely hard surfaced. So the Travis Perkins site, as we talk, is literally a concrete slab right to the edge of the site. So we're confident that we can protect the trees properly, and we want to protect the trees properly during the construction of the site. The service charge, I think it's a discussion. We're fully aware of that. I think in terms of the management, Railpen will want to own this, and they will want to maintain this to the highest possible standard. That's not suggesting that the local authority wouldn't, But sometimes there is a divergence between the level of maintenance the local authority does and the level of maintenance that a private landowner would do. So I think they were the questions in the main. I don't know if there's anything that I didn't pick up on, Councillor.
The family space, I think.
Yeah, oh sorry, you're quite right. That's why I want to bring up the plan. Can you see building E at the bottom?
Can you see that where the little cursor is next to the E?
So there is dedicated open space that we felt was essential for the creche. So we've deliberately provided, and there's an explicit open space for the creche, for the families there. So there is an open space for the creche. Matt's trying to show you a nicer image of it.
Has that come up? Can people see that? So we have the creche has its own creche garden, but equally the green space that runs through the middle is undulating, and there is a child play space at the southern end of that green space. So the idea is there's specific play space in terms of kind of play equipment that is there, but there is also then the green space which allows children to run around and just enjoy the trees and the green space.
Can I just come in on the Chisholm Trail, because the adopted policy and the preferred route of the Chisholm Trail was originally entirely dependent on Network Rail land and didn't rely on any part of this site, the Travis Perkins site. So what we've done is actually by setting our buildings back and allowing this space for sort of hard landscaping on our eastern boundary, we've actually allowed future flexibility. We've given that space voluntarily to the Chisholm Trail, should it be able to come forward. As it's been mentioned several times, you know, it's not within our gift for the connections to the north and to the south. That's between County Council and Network Rail. But of course, we believe that we've done everything we can to accommodate that, whether it is able to come forward on our eastern boundary or indeed is forced to come down Devonshire Road, by having a bike hub that can be accessed from both directions, and of course setting aside that space on our eastern boundary. Should that Chisholm Trail not be able to come forward on the eastern boundary because an agreement can't be reached with Network Rail, then that's going to remain very active anyway. There's a good deal of visibility there with the officers. We have all the edible planting there, which we hope will be active, and we're in discussions with Cambridge Sustainable Food to ensure that all the edible planting will be very well managed, very well used and loved by the whole local community.
Thank you.
Can I just pick up on that, Blake? We think the space, just handing over a little bit of kit for children to play on, Councillor, isn't actually the way we want to design the space. We want the whole space to be enriching, so undulating grass areas where children can run up and down, balance and beams. The whole space should be inclusive and welcoming, rather than just an old-fashioned, here's an area that's fenced off with a swing and roundabout. You know, so it's a little bit more inclusive in the way that we've looked at the landscape.
Thank you. Hopefully that's answered your questions, Councillor Pora. I need to move on because we are running very short time. So Councillor Bagent, could you give your questions, please?
Thank you, Nigel. I will be brief. There probably would have been more, but I recognise that the time's marching on. I welcome the amount of people, and I'm sure the Mill Road traders will welcome the amount of people that are going to be brought into this area. I mean, if you're talking about office space for 1,000 people, that's a potential 1,000 lunches every day on Mill Road. And that will add to the argument, of course, of why this ridiculous opening of the bridge could be changed. But I have 2 points that I would like you to note. I would have grave concern about the lack of cycle spaces. If there's 1,000 people in the offices and possibly 250 people in the flats, then we need a lot of cycle space. So I'm not going to comment on that anymore. And my point is on the 20%. Will the 20% be made up of 20% in equal? So if you build 4-bedroom flats, will 20% of those be affordable housing? And if you build 1-bedroom flats, will we go down a route which we're increasingly uncomfortable with, where you give the cheapest places to the affordable housing and we don't get the 20% by volume? I mean, I'm looking for the new local plan, of course, to change that situation, and I guess that you're going to miss that. Maybe not, maybe you will. But I'd like to know how you're going to break down the 20%. Thank you very much. I like the look of the thing, by the way. I think it's progressive.
Thanks, Mike.
We've got a lot of cycle spaces. We've heard what Edward said. I think if we have recognised the number of employees in the building councillor and all the cycle spaces with compliant with your current standards for office parking. The residential has been a challenge, but we provide all of the cycle parking secure within the building in accordance with your standards. Edward's point was a slightly different one, which was this is all car free, should you not have more? Our point would be the reason putting jobs and houses close to each other next to the station is we're trying to encourage people to walk. That's the fundamental thing we're trying to do here. This is predominantly 1 and 2 bedroom units because of the nature of the stock. It is 20% of those units that will be tenure blind, distributed uniformly across the scheme. So it will be no poor doors, it will be distributed evenly across the scheme, and it will be an even contribution of those units, 20% by unit number, councillor, that will be discounted.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So Councillor Thornborough, you're next, please.
Yeah, I think there's lots of things I do like. I do like the mixed use and the architecture, but one of the questions that it's going to come down to is about overdevelopment as raised by Richard Robertson. And these, I'm going to make a few comments rather than questions. I think that is something that will be asked. I think it's also adjacent to the conservation area on 2 sides that hasn't been referred to. I think that is an important issue and has been raised on the railway station site. There, the number, if we're, that we're currently, there is a requirement. We want car free, but we haven't thought ahead. So you might be saying that you're meeting the requirements for cycles, but it needs to be, we need to think ahead on this and really what does car-free living mean? And it's not just meeting minimum standards. And I also have high hopes about this company and the social responsibility. So meeting minimum standards as raised by Martin Smart and others for space standards and affordable rented is a bit disappointing when the company that the earlier presentations were very aspirational and we have high hopes. I really think deliveries due to the way retail has changed is always seriously under provided for, and I think going forward the outdoor space for employees has really to be considered. Older people, I mean, there was comments that there may not be families here, but there most certainly will be older people, and we're changing demographics as recent older people, and I would have, this is the kind of space that older people do want to live in. So I think really well designed for older people in their homes, the community's facilities and the outdoor space would be great. That's it. Thank you.
Nigel, can I just pick up on one point? When we talk about minimum standards, and just so we're clear, this isn't minimum standards of open space. Policy 68, Councillor Thornborough, is clear that in urban areas it should be led by context and design, not by a quantum, because your open space standards apply to greenfield sites in the same way that they do the actual appendix. It has been clear, and it's ingrained within the policy that it's a design context-led approach to, and we've been helpful discussions with your landscape and design officers. So I don't want you to go away thinking that we met minimum standards on open space. No,
I didn't. It was minimum for the space standards in the accommodation and affordable rent. Those were the 2 that's been raised as minimums.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, we exceeded the standards in terms of those balconies. So you don't have any. We've included those balconies over and above the space standards that have been accommodated. We've recognised that in relation to things we all know about. So we are exceeding those standards in terms of the balconies.
Okay, thank you for that. We are over time, but there's just one more comment in the chat. Councillor Gorstrop-Wood, I think you would like to just speak. So perhaps just make this the last comment, if that's all right.
Okay, well, I would fully support what everybody else has said. I was actually going to ask about adaptations, and I think I always get the name wrong, NEM 42 standards for the flats. And as someone, you know, approaching older age, I think that's extremely important, but Katie has of course covered that. The other thing I wanted to just ask was the creche and the play area outside it. Now, is that secure and purely for the creche, or is that open and public to all users of the flats and others, the child play area?
Okay, thank you. Mike, do you want to address that?
I think the creche would be secure in the day, but it's a good question. We could think about whether it is a dual use, Doug, and whether it could be open to residents in the evening. It would be a shame to let it rest fallow, wouldn't it, when the creche is closed? If it's an open space, it would make sense that we could find a way of utilising that and making it accessible to the residents outside of the creche time. I think that's a very good question.
Okay, thank you. That's obviously something to take away, along with an awful lot of other points and questions that are raised there. So I'm calling an end to that part of the session. So could Mike, could you please now sum up your point? So you've got 5 minutes to sum up.
I think this committee is probably sick and tired of me summing up, so I thought I'd hand over to the much more new, fresh-faced Doug, who's going to sum up on behalf of the applicant, if that's okay, Nigel.
That's fine, thank you.
Great, thanks Nigel, thanks Mike. We're looking at a number of firsts here for Devonshire Gardens, trailblazing to a large extent here in Cambridge. So it's already been mentioned that we'll be the first major car-free scheme in Cambridge. We're also, I think, going to be the first One Planet Living scheme. We're potentially going to be the first to deliver BREEAM outstanding office buildings. And we're the first major build-to-rent scheme in the city centre as well. And I think what sets this scheme apart from anything else that's really been seen before is that there's very much the long-term investor here in Railpen right from the start, who will manage not just the buildings, but also the public spaces as well. So they're very much aligned and incentivized to ensure that there is that cohesive, long-lasting community, and that we deliver high quality materials that don't just look good on the day this is finished, but it looks even better in 20, 30 years time when Railpen is still there, very much invested. As we've said before, over half of this site is going to be new public open space, which is a huge benefit to the local community. We're looking at almost a 400% net gain in biodiversity. That's using Natural Cambridgeshire's Developing with Nature toolkit. I mentioned before, we're enabling the Chisholm Trail to come forward and doing everything we can within our red line to accommodate that. Mentioned that it's all electric, no fossil fuels on site in order to be enabled for net zero carbon in operation. We've carried out extensive consultation process with, as I said, over 3,000 people engaging with this, submitting their written feedback, as well as taking part in the various polls. And there are huge benefits here to the wider community. We haven't really touched on the pavilion in the centre, which we're going to ask the local community to actually help us design. So we're going to run a competition next year on that to invite local artists and architects to come up with their ideas as to how that's going to be designed and how it's going to be used. That is there for the benefit of the entire local community. There's co-working space within the ground floor of the offices, again, open to the public, so people don't have to necessarily work from their bedroom or their living area. They've got another place where they can relax, have a coffee, jump on the free Wi-Fi and work if they're working remotely. There are meeting rooms for hire as well within those office buildings that will, again, not just for the benefit of the workers, for anyone in the local community to be able to hire those spaces for everything from yoga classes to sort of TED style talks. We got the edible planting and we're engaging with Cambridge Sustainable Food to ensure that that is well managed for the future, that it's well designed from the start, that we've got the right species in the right places, and that looks fantastic. And we're recycling food waste, we've got composters, we've got sustainable irrigation with the blue roofs and the rainwater harvesting. We've got a community kitchen that allows that edible food that's grown on site to be enjoyed and to be produced. There's all sorts of educational opportunities with local schools there, and again we're engaging with them on that front. We've got artist studios as well. We know that local artists are crying out for messy space where they can create art, where they can exhibit, and this will integrate with our public art strategy as well, where they will actually have some dedicated space within the site in order to carry out their work, which will be very visible and give them a huge degree of pride, because they will have a pretty prime plot on this site. And we've talked about just the wider green spaces with the 55% increase in trees across the site. There's all this talk about a 15-minute city. Well, this is going to be a 5-minute part of that city. It's going to provide everything from offices, from retail, from homes, all within a 5-minute walk. And so really it's helping deliver on that agenda. And I know there's been talk about how there's not really a shortage of jobs, but there is a shortage of offices at the moment, in new offices in central Cambridge. They're being snapped up before they're even finished, and companies will simply relocate elsewhere in the country, or indeed to other countries, if they're not able to find good quality offices here in Cambridge, and that will only be to Cambridge's detriment. It will impact on economic growth, it will impact on jobs, and so we're here to provide that, because there is not a pipeline of offices coming forward, certainly not adequate to meet demand. And we're meeting that twofold with a larger office building, but then there's also the smaller office building which caters more for the local SMEs and startups. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Edward, would you like to sum up for the petitioners, please? And again, 5 minutes, if you will, please.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to really set out what our asks are in terms of what changes we'd like to see to improve the quality of the application. The first, I think, really is the only way to improve the site is to scale back the level of the employment provision, the footprint of the buildings for employment. This would create the opportunity for more open green space, more usable open green space, and less than 20% of the site is actually usable open green space. Most of it is really circulation space, and also more space for delivery, service, removals, vehicles, club cars, and more cycle parking for residents. Now, we actually think that the secure cycle parking for residents should really be provided at a rate of 1 space per resident, given that they will not have a car, and potentially up to one off-gauge cycle parking space per dwelling, because it is perfectly reasonable to think that in time most dwellings will have a cargo bike or a trailer bike or something in order to facilitate moving their children around or moving their shopping around. So we'd like to see more spaces allocated on the site for delivery, service, removals vehicles at both the north and the southern access point. And that needs to be provided for a realistic level of deliveries to the homes and to the business sites. We'd like to see more controlled visitor parking for residents, because residents will have visitors coming from outside the reason. And that needs to be provided for at an appropriate scale, so that people are not trying to park elsewhere. In fact, there's very limited space for the people park elsewhere. It's false to say the trade-off is between car parking spaces and trees. Actually, the thing to give way is the employment space. That's where we need to gain space. We suggest having another go. I know this is difficult, and maybe the applicant has tried every permutation, but I think they should try again to reconfigure the dwellings to increase the level of daylight and sunlight that all the dwellings receive, to ensure a high quality of life. And possibly one possible thought is to move the commercial dwelling so it is commercial, one of the commercial buildings to the north side, the edge of the site, which is the most difficult to provide dwelling space that has direct sunlight. And the final point is that the planning and highway authorities really need to take an active responsibility in securing links for the Chisholm Trail. It's not good enough to leave it to the applicant to try and negotiate with Network Rail, which by the sounds of it is not likely to yield a result in time. And therefore it is important that the Highway Authority in particular takes responsibility and necessarily possibly joins up with the Planning Authority to compulsorily purchase land in order to make those access points a reality for when this site opens. Those are all the points I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Edward. So I think there've been an awful lot of points raised today. Certainly a lot for the applicants, agents to go away and consider, and I hope people have found that useful. I've got a little bit more just to say just about what will happen now. So following the meeting, the committee manager will draft up the notes of the meeting, and these will be published on the Development Control Forum meeting webpage, and they will also be appended to the planning officer's report. So the planning case officer should contact the applicant's agents after the meeting to discuss the outcome of the meeting and to follow up any further action that is necessary. The applicant will be encouraged to keep in direct contact with the petitioners and to seek their views on any proposed amendments. The council will follow its normal neighbour notification procedures on any amendments to the application. Along with other individuals who may have made representations on the application, the petitioners' representatives will be informed of the date of the meeting at which the application is to be considered by committee and of their public speaking rights. The committee report will be publicly available 5 clear days before the committee meeting. So, as I said, I hope that everyone finds that it's been useful. Certainly a lot of points have been raised today. So thank you, everyone. And that now concludes the Development Control Forum. So please could the meeting producer end the live stream, confirm when the live stream is ended. Thank you, everyone.